before we get going with the meat of the presentation, which is focused on Todd and the topic, I just wanted to touch base on Community Futures Middlesex, who we are, what we do, and I've got a few slides to do that. So Todd, if you could advance the next slide for me, that would be great. So just to highlight our services, so we essentially we've got with the support of FedDev Ontario, we sort of focus on 4 key areas, and a lot of this is what we do, and for the most part is free. We offer business mentoring, consulting, and support, and assist with community economic development. This can be one-on-one or through participation of larger stakeholder groups. Business financing is one of the key areas that we support, and this is in the form of loans. I'll touch base on this in a second. We've got workshops and training, obviously, the similar to what we're hosting this morning, and we usually like to do these things in person, but we've all had to kind of adopt to the new realities, and virtual is the way to go. So this is actually the fourth of 6 webinars that we've got scheduled from starting. I think it was started in the late summer, early fall, up to the end of December, and we'll be coming out with a new lineup of workshops in the new year. So keep, I guess, in tune for that and what those topics will be. Before the end of the year, we'll come up with that. Next slide, Todd. So just to sort of identify who our clients are, it's obviously the entrepreneurs, small business owners, revenue generating nonprofits, and social enterprises. We work at the county level and serving clients located within the rural areas outside of the City of London. Next slide, Todd, if you can, please. So this slide just touches on our loans and financing. So we do manage a portfolio of about $8 million in investment funds, and we currently have about $4 million available to distribute. And we do this through a variety of different products. And the 2 primary ones are micro loans of up to $30,000 and small business loans of up to $300,000. We're currently serving as a delivery agent for FedDev Ontario for the Regional Relief and Recovery Fund, and this product is specific to helping businesses that have been impacted by COVID-19. And so that is a loan product. It's a loan of up to $40,000. It's 0% interest, no payments to the end of December. So December 31st, 2022. And the unique aspect of this product is similar to other forms of government support and relief that are out there. There's a forgivable component of up to 25%, and that's if 75% is paid back within prior to the December 31st, 2022 timeframe. Next slide, Todd. So this slide is really just to share our contact information with you, and you'll notice that we've got information about our office location. So this is a new office that we moved into in post-COVID in April of this past year, located on the main street of Ilderton. We're currently not open to the public yet, but we're hopefully, in the not so distant future, we will be able to help welcome people into our office and maybe have an open house. But essentially right now we're doing a lot by phone consult, video consult, and we are starting to book appointments in person, respecting protocols, but that's by appointment only. The phone number there is our general phone number. Feel free to reach out to us. That's also the best way to get a hold of us is through maybe our info@cfmiddlesex.ca email address that is shared by the team here in the office. And I also want to highlight we've got a new website, which is cfmiddlesex.ca, and that was launched at the end of July. A lot of information about our programs, resources, supports is available there, and what we feel is a very navigable format and accessible format. So if you haven't had a chance yet, take a look at the website. We put a lot of information about events. We put news articles on there. So if you're looking to keep current on our activities and different programs that we have, it's a good place to go. And the last thing I'll touch on is we have a fairly active social media presence, whether it's through Facebook, LinkedIn. We've got a YouTube channel. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, and we also use that as a way of sharing information out to the community and building awareness for who we are and what we do. So that's really my presentation, but I now want to sort of just transition into the presentation by Todd. So Todd Cox is the Chief Technology Officer, and he's the owner of Attaché Group. He's going to touch on who he is and his company, but it is a London, Ontario-based IT consulting hardware software solution provider. Members of our team here, actually, when I first joined Community Futures Middlesex back in November, we all participated in a training or a workshop series that Todd put on, where he was addressing, it was really intended to increase the awareness of employees of how to identify, detect, and mitigate the risks of cyber attacks. And so at the time, as a team, we thought a lot of this information that was presented would be value or interest or benefit to a lot of the small business owners that we're working with. And I think even more so now, post-COVID, in the times when a lot of our small business owners have had to transition or pivot, and there's been an increased dependency on utilization of online technologies as a result of the impact of COVID. So we reached out to Todd, and we're very pleased that he was interested in putting on this webinar for us, and we think it would be of a lot of value to our clients. And so that being said, this is where I'm going to pass it off on to Todd. And thank you very much, Todd, for agreeing and joining us this morning to share your insights.
Great. Thanks very much, Todd. Appreciate that. So before I dive in, I just want to just a couple housekeeping things. I want to make sure everyone is able to hear this. I know I believe it's Isa dropped because she couldn't hear it. I'm hoping she was able to reconnect and hear everything okay. Maybe if you guys can just type in the chat window, yes, you can hear me and see the slides. That would be great. Everyone's on mute, so I appreciate that. But I just want to make sure everyone can hear me, can see the slides. Okay, so Rob's saying I can hear and see. Great. Okay, and I know, there's a few other people that maybe. Okay, excellent. So very good. So I'm kind of keeping an eye on the chat window throughout the presentation. So if you have a question during the presentation, just pop it in that chat window. I'll try to keep an eye on it as best I can and answer it in real time. As Todd mentioned, this is being recorded, so there will be a recording of this afterwards that will be available. And I guess the other thing I would tell you is feel free to broadcast your video. For me, presenting in this kind of a COVID-19 world, I'm used to presenting in person, and so I like to get feedback from the audience. I like to see their facial expressions and so forth. Right now, I'm staring at a screen that has, just a bunch of letters on it, initials of people's names. So please, if you want, by all means, broadcast your video if you feel that's appropriate. It makes it a little more personal for me. I have no issue if you do that. So that's the housekeeping items. So a little bit more about me. Todd mentioned that I'm co-owner of a company based in London, Ontario called Attaché Group. We do a fair bit of IT consulting work. We also are a support company for small and medium businesses. So we support companies that really can't afford to hire a full-time IT person. Maybe they're sick of using, Nerds on Site or Best Buy or something like that to try to, or even, we always joke about, the nephew or niece that comes and helps out when they can. That's what we do. We do IT support for small and medium companies. Best way to reach me is probably email. You can see I do have a Twitter and a LinkedIn account. I do not have a Facebook or an Instagram or anything like that. For good reason. My wife calls me antisocial, so be it. I guess I'm antisocial. I don't have a lot of interest in being on some of those platforms. They do pose a security risk in some situations, and we're going to dig into that in pretty good detail today. As far as my career, I've spent about 25 years in this business. About half of that was spent in the United States. I lived in Texas and Oklahoma for a while, and um, around 8 or 9 years ago, my wife and I decided it was time to move back to Canada. We had two boys, and they weren't really seeing any of their relatives, so we decided to move back to Canada and bought and sold a few IT companies and ended up at Attaché Group. So let's dive in here. So I know that's a big agenda, but we're going to move through this pretty quickly. So we're going to start with talking about what I call today's threat landscape. With starting with a look back, kind of seeing where all this ransomware and cyber threats and malware and viruses all originated from. We're going to look at some real life scams and why they're successful. I'm going to jump out of the presentation. We'll actually go into my email and I'll show you how to identify potentially harmful content. We'll talk about traveling or working remotely, and then also we'll look at social media and personal information. Most of this agenda here is taken from our end user presentation that focuses on educating end users. But from there on in, from raising the red flag forward, that is more focused on a business owner. So what you as a business owner should be doing to protect your data, protect yourself, protect your company. And we'll talk about that and how we could potentially help you if you don't have someone who can do that for you. And there'll be some time at the end for Q&A. We've got an hour and a half blocked for this, but I will stay on the phone or stay on the line as long as I need to answer questions. So when I talk about today's threat landscape, I start with a little background. We look back. And so if you think about a decade or so ago, cyber threats were really viruses, and they were really just distributed by kids in their basement. These were kids that were looking for fame, to be able to brag that they had hacked into some Department of Defense, or hey, I was able to get free phone calls, free long distance calls from Bell. It was all about the fame, right? It was predominantly just kids in their basement. If we fast forward to today, that motivation has very much shifted from fame to financial gain. This is no longer about kids in their basement, trying to break into a system for bragging rights. This is organized crime, very well-funded organized criminals that are making a lot of money off of extorting people through these schemes. If you think about it, it's a lot easier for me to set up a ransomware. A ransomware that goes out to a million or millions of potential victims and extort money from them than it is for more traditional extortion means, right? And we'll talk about, for those of you that don't know what ransomware is, we'll talk about what that is in a couple of slides. I always like to show some cases in the news, and these are predominantly public sector examples. So City of Stratford was hit with ransomware. Up in Midland, up in the kind of the central part of Ontario, they were hit and they had to actually pay a ransom. So that's what ransomware is. It's where somebody takes over your files and basically you're asked to pay a ransom to get those files back. Wasaga Beach happens to be where my sister lives. Their town hall computers were seized through a ransomware scheme. And this one for me is particularly close to home. I live outside of Burlington in a town called Waterdown, and the city of Burlington actually was hit with what's called a phishing scheme. And this is where a lady received an email to transfer $500,000 to an account in an email, and she did that without really checking anything or validating whether she should have done that or not. So we're going to talk about how this happens and more importantly, how this could have been prevented so that lady would not have transferred $500,000 to a bogus account and never get that money back. In today's day and age, and I say COVID-19, unfortunately, we're not seeing a decrease because of COVID. We're actually seeing an increase because of COVID in terms of scams and malicious activity going on the internet. COVID presents an interesting opportunity for people to really exploit the anxiety that people are feeling over the pandemic, and really try to fool them into doing things that they shouldn't do. So again, we're hearing things around CERB, around the benefit payments. We're also, I read about this one about where local hydro companies were threatening to cut off power to people if they didn't pay their bill, and of course this was all bogus. Another, this is a website, the Canadian Anti-Fraud Center actually posts kind of known fraudulent activity. And you can see it ranges everything from people calling and offering duct cleaning services. There's the hydroelectric power company example I just gave. um, you know, there's other ones. CERB is a big one, obviously. And by the way, these are not just coming through email. These are coming into your smartphone via text. It could be coming through email, could be a phone call. We're going to talk about all of those things today throughout the presentation. So I would argue that if we look at kind of where we sit today, everyone really that's on the internet that has some sort of digital presence is a target, and it's because the criminals are using what we call mass attacks. They're not targeting just individual companies like maybe a decade ago. A decade ago, you would see hackers targeting a General Motors, IBM, federal government. They were very much targeting these companies that we would consider would be kind of big fish, if you will. Today, that's not the case. Today, the case is we're looking at mass attacks, millions of potential victims. And so, really everybody's information has value. I remember the first time I presented this, I had a lady put up her hand and say to me, hey, why would somebody target me? My information, my personal information is worth nothing. I don't have trade secrets or patents. And I said, okay. So I said, you're telling me that if someone were to get a hold of photographs of, say, your children or your grandchildren, and they were able to lock those files, and you had no backups of those files, you wouldn't be prepared to pay some money to get those files back. And of course, as she reflected on that, she said, yes, I absolutely would be willing to pay money. So I was able to illustrate pretty easily that your personal information has value because it has value to you. And criminals are going to exploit that because they realize it has value to you. It may have value to nobody else, but it has value to you. Um, so small and medium-sized organizations, I would argue, are pretty easy pickings. And really, the smaller you are, the easier pickings you are, right? You've probably got a limited or even no IT budget, as if you're a 1 or 2 person firm. And even if you are a larger entity, chances are your IT budgets are shrinking. They're not getting larger. There's a serious security skills shortage worldwide right now. So the last number I looked at, there was about 1 million jobs worldwide that could not be filled around IT security. So if you've got kids, grandkids, nieces and nephews, friends that are sort of high school age, looking to graduate, not sure what they're going to do with themselves from a career perspective, it's not a bad career to get into. There's some money to be made in IT security. And then the third point here is this notion of a growing attack surface. What does that mean? It just simply means there's a lot more devices that people have. If I'm doing this presentation live, I ask for a show of hands in terms of how many devices people have. And it's not uncommon for people to have 4 or 5 or even more devices when they look at their personal devices, their personal smartphones, tablets, computers, laptops, in addition to maybe corporately owned devices. So all of these devices are what we call an attack surface, and it gives hackers more points of entry into your data, right? Yeah, so someone just said he has 8 just at home. So that's really not uncommon. It sounds like a lot, but if you start doing the math, it's really not. So attackers are using a variety of tactics. So ransomware, we talked about a little bit at the beginning. This is the notion of where somebody gets into your files, they're able to encrypt your files with military grade encryption, and there's no way to unlock those. Rebooting your computer doesn't do anything. You literally have to have the unlock, the encryption key to be able to unlock those files. So they demand a ransom, and you pay a ransom typically in Bitcoin, which is cyber currency that cannot be traced. A phishing attack is what we just talked about at the city of Burlington, where an email is faked, and we're going to go into that in a lot more detail here in a minute. Where an email is faked, and the email typically is demanding some sort of financial transaction, whether it's wiring money, emailing money, here my account has changed, please start using this new account. I've personally been involved in some of these in terms of helping people, get restitution, figure out what happened, and so forth. A brute force attack is, again, just what it seems, or how it sounds. This is where an application or a piece of software on the internet just hammers away at a device that it finds on the internet. Typically, it's a firewall. Firewall is sort of that first point of entry from your office out into the internet. And what they'll do is they'll just hammer away at that device, and they'll try, basic passwords that would work. If I'm trying to hack a device, I'll use, the user ID being admin and the password admin, or I'll use admin with no password, or I'll use admin with the word password. Those three sets of credentials will oftentimes get me into a device that has never been reset from the factory, never been changed from the factory. And of course, as you can imagine, consumer grade devices are easier to penetrate. Credential harvesting is a notion of where someone's going to ask you for your password, whether that's in an email or on a phone call. And I can tell you with very, very good certainty that no legitimate company is going to ask for your password over the phone. It's just not going to happen. They might send you a password reset link, but no one will ask you for your password over the phone or in an email. And then lastly, malware and malicious botnets are really, where viruses have progressed in the last 2 decades. So these are very, very harmful viruses that can do some pretty harmful things. That's why it's very important to run an antivirus or an endpoint protection product on all of your computers to make sure that you're regularly scanning for these types of things. An example of this would be something like a keystroke logging program where it infects your computer, and a third party is now able to monitor all of your keystrokes. So you can imagine if you went to your banking website, put in your username and typed in your password, that logging tool would actually capture all of that. So now somebody has your banking information. So it's really important to make sure that you're running software endpoint protection on your computer to prevent this kind of thing from happening. A couple slides here, just really to make a point. This is not meant for you to be able to read at 30 or 40 feet away. This is really just to illustrate a point, and that the point is, back in 2011, there was one strain of ransomware. If we fast forward to 2017, you can see just how many strains of ransomware were out in the world in 2017. Exponential growth. And of course, I can't show you what it would look like for 2020 because there's no way to depict that on a single page. It would be multiple pages to show you in a subway map or tube map how many strains of ransomware exist in the world today. This is an interesting slide. I guess interesting is one word to describe it. I would also use scary, terrifying as another adjective. So this is talking about where in the future ransomware is going to get very personal. So imagine that you were of an age and health that you required a pacemaker, and you're going about your business, and all of a sudden you receive a text message saying, "Hey, transfer me $1,000, $1,500 to this account, or I'm going to mess with your pacemaker. I'm going to turn your pacemaker off." I know it sounds like science fiction. I know it sounds far-fetched, but a pacemaker is just another electronic device that is absolutely on a network. It may be a very secure, protected network, but it's still on a network, and so it's susceptible to vulnerabilities. The IoT devices on this slide, and so the picture of a Nest thermostat there, I mean, that's already happened. That's happening all the time, right? This is how hackers breached Target back a few years ago. They came in through the HVAC system or the thermostat and were able to gain access to the corporate network through this thermostat. I read all the time about hackers compromising people's personal thermostats, nanny cams, smart doorbells. One in particular I read about where there was a hacker that was literally in the middle of the night was having a conversation with this couple's 3 or 4 year old through her nanny cam, and it was obviously just a guy that hacked their camera. So pretty scary stuff. Imagine the future. You're rolling along in your fully autonomous car, and all of a sudden that car pulls over to the side of the road, and up on your screen pops a message saying, "Hey, I'm demanding a ransom. Otherwise, you're not going anywhere. You're going to sit on the side of a busy highway." Again, today when we sit here, we grin, we smile about, "Hey, this sounds like science fiction. This would be a great info for a movie, a great theme for a movie." This is all very much going to happen or potentially happen in the future. We're already seeing the number of 57%, maybe even higher, where ransomware is targeting social media accounts. And we're going to spend at least a few slides on social media. So hopefully I've scared you sufficiently enough. That was the intent of those last couple of slides, was to really scare you in terms of what's going on out there right now, and sort of what to be aware of. So we're going to take a look at sort of some real life scams and why they succeed. So the most common one, I think, still is this notion of a bogus email. I call it a bogus email because it's just an email that really is not authentic. It's a forged email, if you will. And how do we know this? Because, well, we know this because, you know, someone might give you a call one morning and say, hey, I got a really weird email from you, and I don't think it came from you. It says it came from you, but I don't think it did. And so this is kind of the most common one, and the first initial reaction is, oh, I was hacked. You know, we run a help desk for small and medium businesses, as I mentioned at the onset of the presentation, where people will call and get support. And, you know, a lot of times we'll get a call and say, oh, I think my email has been hacked. And I can tell you with pretty good confidence, it's probably not hacked, right? To hack someone's email, they would need your password. And if you're relatively safe with your password and your password is complex, the likelihood of somebody hacking your email is very slim. Not to say it doesn't happen, it does happen, and I'll talk about a situation where I saw it happen. But typically what this is called email spoofing. And this is where somebody is just, you know, either using another email, and the display name in the email might say Todd Cox as an example, but if you look at the body of the email, it's something different. That's the easiest one to do. But some of the very sophisticated ones will actually make it look like it's coming from my email domain. It would look like it's coming from attachegroup.com. It might even have my signature that I use cut and pasted into that, depending on how sophisticated these guys want to be. So this is what we call email spoofing. So that's kind of the most common kind. It is possible that you could have a virus or malware. So we've seen a number of situations where everybody in your Outlook recipient in the Outlook address book receives this bogus email. And so my business partner Paul, his mom had this recently, where, you know, a weird email went out to everybody in her address book claiming that her niece was down on her luck and she was trying to collect Apple gift cards to be able to give to her niece. It's kind of ironic. It always seems to be, you know, Apple gift cards or, you know, Visa gift cards. It's never cash, or very rarely is it cash. You know, that's a huge red flag whenever you hear someone talking about, hey, I need to be paid in Apple gift cards, right? So again, everyone in her address book got this email, so that's sort of how we knew that this was going on. It's a good indication that you have malware. So what you would do is you would run a scan and you would contact whoever does your IT support. And you'll see that's going to be a theme here, is that it's really critical to have somebody that you can rely on. Maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody in your company. You know, maybe you don't have anybody, and we should be chatting. But it's important to have somebody that you trust, because if something does happen, you don't want to be scrambling looking for somebody at the 11th hour. Now, it is possible that your mailbox could have been compromised. It's quite rare, but it can happen. The last time I saw this was I was supporting a company in Mississauga, and they were dealing with a Chinese company, Chinese supplier, and the Chinese internet provider had been hacked. They had been compromised. So this Chinese supplier, of course, the hackers had access to this email account, and they were emailing my customer in Mississauga. And I mean, they were referencing very confidential information. They were referencing PO numbers, invoice numbers. In fact, they'd even just taken over an existing email thread, so communications back and forth, and just continued that thread. I mean, that is impossible to know that unless you can detect that maybe the language isn't quite spot on. But if you're already dealing with a Chinese company, that there may already be a language barrier, so it would be very difficult for you to know that this happened. This particular company lost about $65,000 in a wire transfer that happened. And I mean, there was really nothing they could do. If you suspect this, change your password immediately. And again, contact whoever supports you from an IT perspective to let them know this has happened, and make sure that there's no, you know, further action that needs to be taken. So a phishing attempt just kind of builds on this. A phishing attempt is where we're taking this concept of spoofing an email and we're using this to target an individual for financial gain. The typical one is an email from a CEO to wire transfer money. That's a very typical one. Maybe it's an email or text that talks about money being sent to you. I'm gonna give you an example later in the presentation of a very personal, close to home one that almost had my youngest son, fall prey to a scam where he got a text on his phone. I'll show you some screenshots of that in a little bit. So phishing campaigns are pretty common and they're pretty easy to create. And they can be very generic or they can be very specific, targeting an individual with what we call, I use air quotes, confidential information, and I put confidential in quotes for a reason. I'll tell you a quick story about one I read about maybe 6 or 8 months ago. So there was a CEO of a company that was had some kids. He was a soccer coach to his daughter's soccer team, and they were getting ready to go away on a tournament, a soccer tournament that weekend. And so it was kind of well known throughout the office that it was a Friday. He was kind of trying to get out of the office early because he was getting ready to go away for the weekend. And so his executive administrator got an email stating that, hey, we need to, there's a financial transaction that has to happen. This has already been approved by, we'll call him John. John's already approved this. We know that John's trying to get out of town for the soccer tournament, and they named the city, they named his kid's name. It was all very much looked above board because how else would somebody know? And by the way, it also looked like it was coming from a person internal to the company. And you can see where this is going. It was a bogus email, and they were taken for a bunch of money. And the reason this hacker was able to do this was because this CEO had posted all of this information publicly on his Facebook page. He was posting publicly about the soccer tournament that weekend. He regularly posts about the names of his children and so forth. So it was easy for that hacker to take that information off of his Facebook and use that to exploit him on the business side. So just beware, this is what's going on today. Okay, I talked a little bit about how to identify potentially harmful content. I talked about the fact we would be looking at this. So I like to show this slide here, and so get your chat window ready here for anyone who can spot what's wrong with this email. I'll give it 15 to 30 seconds for somebody to put in the chat window what they see as being wrong with this email. Obviously, I've redacted some of the names here, but there's something that is that's very wrong with this email if you're really paying close attention to it. It's actually not grammar. That is a great way though to identify that. I will tell you that's a really good answer, because that is one way that you would potentially spot a fake email, is the grammar. The problem with that is I can tell you that the grammar is getting a lot better. Like, what used to be so super obvious that an email was spoofed because of the grammar, but it's getting harder and harder to spot that. So Todd got it. So basically up here where it says Ontario crop inputs, that is actually a 0. That is not an O, that is a 0. It looks like a capital O, but it is not. It is a 0. I can tell you, you will never see a capital letter in between these brackets. In an email address coming through, it will always be all in lowercase. Now, the display name to the left, which says John Smith, that can be caps, that can be all caps, that can be whatever I want it to be, but the email address will always be in lowercase. So yeah, great spot there, Todd, or whoever's sitting with you. Again, to Issa's point, start by paying close attention to spelling and grammar. That's a dead giveaway typically, but as I said, it's getting better. Look at the email display name, see if the display name sort of lines up with the actual email address itself. I'm going to show you some examples where it doesn't, right? Look for uppercase O's as zeros as uppercase O's. Likewise, an uppercase, a lowercase L can look like an uppercase I. So those are kind of some common ones to look out for. Also look for a lack of personalization. So if an email is going out to thousands of recipients, it's really hard to personalize that email. Likewise, if you're getting an email from somebody that you know well, and the email sounds like it's not very personal, that's a good indication that the email's probably been spoofed. And also, I would tell you not to be fooled by urgent requests, right? If we look at the case of the soccer coach CEO, it was an urgent request. It was, hey, we know John's trying to get out of town. We know he's busy. Don't bug him with this. This has already been approved. We need to get this done ASAP. Let's do this. So again, time is a criminal's enemy. The more time you have to think about something and reflect on it and ask a coworker or ask somebody that you trust, the less likely that criminal will be successful in what they're trying to do. So time is their enemy, and they're always going to try to create a fake sense of urgency. So beware of that. So here's where I want to jump out of the presentation just for a second. I want to show you a couple examples of some emails here that these are real emails, and so these came to me from some of my customers. And so this is a good one here. This is a customer we support down in Sarnia, and hopefully you can see this okay. So this is clearly a bogus email. There's a lot of things when you look at this email, it's pretty clear. What I want to show you is if I hover over this link, so this link says update here. I know it's a little hard to see because it's in blue, but if I hover over this link where it says update here and just leave my mouse hovering over that, you can see the URL that pops up is just an absolute nightmare. It's mopbizarre.co.kr. Well, KR is Korea, right? So it's kind of like, why would anyone be asking for somebody to click on a link that's going to take them to Korea? Here's another pretty obvious one. Your security is our most primary concern and priority. There's the whole grammar thing coming out, right? So this one's really obvious. But here's the interesting thing. This is the owner of the business that sent this to me, and he's saying, "Hey, I've included this email received. I'm sure it's spam. I'm just checking." He's not sure it's spam. That's why he sent it to me, right? So if he's not sure, you can only imagine that his employees are not sure either, right? So beware of this. If you have employees, that you need to make sure you're educating employees in terms of what's going on out there. I'll show you a couple other examples here, some better examples actually. So this one here, actually, I want to show you as an example of one where the display name has been set to something. So Michael DeLulo, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He was the chief administration officer at Middlesex Center. And so you can see here, if you're paying attention, that the email address itself is gd21@btinternet.com. It has nothing to do with middlesexcenter.on.ca. But again, on a Monday morning or a morning where you're maybe a little tired, you're not paying attention, you could easily think that this is Michael DeLulo. Now, not respective, we can see right here this big yellow bar here that says, hey, this email is originated from outside your organization. I mean, that's the real yellow flag here, if you will. But I mean, that's a lot of mail systems don't have this banner that tells you that it's come from outside your organization. So pretending that yellow banner wasn't there, it would be easy to see this and say, okay, this is Michael, because it says it's from Michael DeLulo, but it's absolutely not. It's from an internet address that we don't know. And it would be very easy for me. I could go sign up, create a Gmail account right now, and I can make the display name whatever I want, and there's nothing to prevent me from doing that. So be aware of this. I'll show you one more example that I like. This is an Office 365 spoof. So it looks like it's coming from Microsoft Office 365. This one's really well done. It's got the logos. It's interesting. This customer sent this to me, and she's saying, hey, it looks sketchy, so I didn't open it. So what I like to do as an IT professional is I like to click on this. I go and click on it in sort of a sandbox, in a protected environment, if you will. And this one was really sneaky. So when I clicked on it, it actually took me to a website that looked like Microsoft's website, and it asked me for my existing password. Now, usually when websites do this, they will ask you to put in your current password and then a new password immediately, and you can see there's a lock on the website. It's all encrypted. This one was not. This one basically said, hey, put your password in. So, and when I typed the password in, it wasn't hiding the password either. So, I put a bogus password in and I clicked next, and then it said, okay, now put your new password in. So what they were doing was they were just simply capturing her existing password for her Office 365 account, asking her to put in a new password with no intention of using that. But now they have her existing password. She thinks she's changed it now. All she's done is she's given her existing password to criminals. And so I thought that one was quite interesting. It was very well done, and thankfully she was able to spot this, that it looked fishy, and she got back to me. So there's some examples of ones that I like to show. So again, just hovering over that URL, the address will be displayed. I oftentimes get a question, well, I don't use a computer, I use an iPad, and so there's no way for me to hover over the URL, and that's true. This is more of a Windows or a Mac where you have a mouse and you can actually position the mouse over the URL before you click it. I would also tell you, though, an iPad and an iPhone is much less susceptible to getting malicious malware and viruses and so forth. Not that anything is completely preventable, but the likelihood of an iPhone or an iPad getting some of these things that are really targeted for a Windows environment is pretty slim. So you're fairly safe opening things on an iPad or an iPhone. Again, nothing's 100% guaranteed, but you're much safer on that type of a device than you would be on a traditional Windows computer. I mentioned this earlier. Be aware of credential harvesting. No legitimate company is going to request credentials in an email or over the phone. It's just not going to happen. And then, if in doubt, forward this over to your IT provider. That's again a theme of this presentation is to get people that are knowledgeable involved early, so they can weigh in. So the phone is another interesting one. And when I say phone, I mean it could be a landline. It could be like an old school landline phone for those of us who still have those. Smartphone, obviously. Really, it's just a phone conversation in general. We're seeing a huge uptick in the use of phones in these scams. So obviously an unsolicited phone call is a telltale sign. I mean, if you're receiving a phone call from the CRA that your taxes are overdue and there's a warrant out for your arrest, yet you're current on your taxes, it's probably a scam, right? I'm being a bit facetious, but you would be surprised at how many people fall for these things. I was talking to a gentleman the other day who was relatively young. He was, younger by my standards. He was in his mid 30s, and he actually fessed up and told me that he fell prey to a CRA scam where he literally borrowed $10,000 from his parents and paid in Apple, iTunes gift cards. And it was all I could do not to say, like, why? Why would you think that the CRA would ask for Apple iTunes gift cards? Like, you think these scams are targeted at, new Canadians, immigrants, people that maybe have a challenge with the English language. This was a guy that was born and grew up here that was pretty computer savvy that fell for a $10,000 scam. As I walked away, I kind of thought to myself, wow, if that was me, I wouldn't be telling anybody. I'd be too embarrassed. But this happens to everybody, or it can happen to everybody, has the potential to happen to everybody. It's very simple to spoof a phone number. Just like we can spoof an email, I can spoof a phone number. I can make my phone look like whoever I want to be. And so in that vein, there's a scam going on right now, and it's a CRA scam. And so what happens is the phone rings, the call display says the CRA, person picks it up, and they think it's a CRA on the other line. And they talk about how there's some back taxes due and they need to pay that. And here's the interesting part is the CRA person then says, okay, just to confirm this, I'm going to hang up, and someone from your local police department will be calling you to confirm all of this. And of course, person hangs up the phone, and a few minutes later, the phone rings and it has the local police department in the call display. And then there sounds like somebody very official on the other end of the phone. And this particular news clipping here, this was back in November of last year, but I've heard this is still going on. Literally, like, the lady went to the bank. She still had the criminal on her cell phone, who she thought was a police officer, as she went to the bank. And of course, they figured it out when her husband got home that it was a scam and she had lost the money. So just be aware that it's very easy to spoof a phone number. It's very simple. And how do we do that? So any of these voice over IP systems, of these phone systems, you can easily put in whatever you want the call display to be. There's some apps out there for smartphones that you can do this to. So it's not incredibly difficult to do this. Again, no legitimate company would ask for sensitive information over the phone, so just remember that. And I mentioned that texting scams are becoming much more popular. So this is my own personal example that happened to my son Ryan on his birthday last year. So he received a text that he had money waiting for him. And anyone who has, teenagers know that cash is king, right? He saw dollar signs here, and on all caution went out the window, right? So Ryan, his name is, hasn't been through dad's, cybersecurity 101 class. And so he didn't notice anything here that was suspicious, as in, this right here where it says not secure, and it has just an internet, a numerical internet IP address here. It doesn't even have a banking URL here. This is completely bogus. But all he saw were dollar signs, so he started down the path on this text. And what stopped him was they were asking him questions that he couldn't answer. So they asked him for his driver's license number. Well, Ryan's not 16; he doesn't drive. So he, of course, called my wife and said, "Hey, I'm trying to receive the cash that you sent me, and I'm having trouble with it." And my wife was like, "Whoa, what are you talking about? There's no cash waiting for you. You've already got your birthday present, right?" Ironically, this happened on the day of his birthday, November 1st. So whether they were targeting his social media site and knew it was his birthday, and we're trying to lure him in. Luckily, this was thwarted. The things that Ryan took away from this, of course, is that, first of all, whenever we send him money, and we send him money a fair bit, as again, if you got teenagers, they're constantly asking for money, we would always send that through an email. We would never text him that. It would come through an email, and more importantly, it would also have a skill testing question for him to receive the money as well. None of this happened on this text, but of course he saw dollar signs, and all he wanted to do was get that $250 into his account. So kind of a funny story now, because we didn't we weren't victimized by it, but something to be aware of. The texting scams are becoming much more popular. I would tell you, if you don't recognize a number, don't answer the phone. That's just sort of something that I live by pretty religiously. If I don't recognize the number, I don't answer the call. I've told my friends, family, business associates, customers that if you need to reach me urgently, call me, and then if I don't pick up, call me right back with the same number. If I see the same number, call me within a couple of seconds or 30 seconds. I know it might be an emergency, and I would typically pick it up. But just be aware that if you don't recognize the number, a good practice is not to answer the phone. And even if you do, just be aware that it could very well be a scam. I always say try Googling the phone number as well. If you get a call from somebody and you talk to somebody and it sounds really official and you think it might be the CRA and this might be legitimate, just go and Google the phone number. Go to the CRA's website and see if this is a number that is associated with that particular entity. I can tell you by Googling a phone number, oftentimes it'll come back and it'll tell you, yeah, this is a known, issue. This is a number that's been associated with some bogus scams, and it makes you feel better. You kind of breathe a sigh of relief that other people have identified this as well. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. We're about almost 50 minutes in, and we're kind of rounding the corner here. I got a couple of slides on traveling or working remotely. Whether that's personal travel or business travel. I know all travel in general has sort of been pretty restricted lately, but I refer to travel as even just kind of leaving the confines of your house or home office. You should have a heightened awareness in general. You're no longer behind any sort of firewall. You're now out there, if you will. And so in that vein, I always tell people, be very wary of public or free Wi-Fi. It's very simple for a criminal to set up a wireless access point and try to get you to connect to that access point, broker an internet connection so you think you're on the internet, but of course you're on that person's access point, and then that they're able to see kind of all the traffic going across there. So I always tell people, use a VPN connection. What does that mean? It's a virtual private network connection. There's a number of companies that are advertising this. NordVPN is one you may have seen on TV. And it's just a piece of software that runs on your smartphone, your tablet, your computer, that establishes a secure connection between your machine and a known secure server through this company, so that then all of the traffic that goes across that is encrypted, meaning that no one can see that traffic. I would tell you never, ever, ever conduct a sensitive transaction or financial transaction over public Wi-Fi without some sort of VPN. I mean, the reality is my cell phone is pretty fast. If I tether to it, if I use it as a hotspot, it's very fast and it's much more secure. Most of us have some pretty large data plans, so we're not carving through data if we do this. I just be cautious of free Wi-Fi. Keep your devices in sight when you're traveling. I've almost had my laptop taken twice. The last two times I was through Pearson Airport. They've got sort of an automated sort of system where gates open and close and direct things whether or not they want to screen them or not. And a guy just walked away with my computer, and it was an honest mistake, and I just happened to have a feeling that might have been my computer, so I kind of yelled out to him as he was walking away, and sure enough, he had my computer and I had his. There would have been no way for us to get those back. So I just cautious you to just keep a very, very close eye on your valuables in general, but particularly your IT when you're in the airport. When you get to where you're going and you're in your hotel room, make sure if there's a safe there, use that. Secure your IT and your valuables in your hotel safe wherever possible. I would also tell you, if you're on a computer, a laptop that has a plug-in Ethernet port, to plug into the wall. That's a much faster, much more secure connection than Wi-Fi. Again, try to avoid getting on Wi-Fi if you can. And I would also tell you to consider changing your passwords on sensitive websites when you return home from your trip, especially if you're outside of North America. You don't know. I mean, if you're on vacation in Mexico or some vacation destination, you don't know if you're on a kiosk in their lobby and you're logged into your email or logged into something sensitive, what's going on in the background, what's being logged, what's being tracked, and so forth. So it's very. I mean, I would advise you to stay off of those types of kiosks. But if you have to go on one, just make a habit of changing your password when you return home from your trip. And of course, don't publicize your trip on social media while you're there, right? Don't talk about how wonderful your life is as you're on the beach in Mexico and you've got 10 more days to go on your vacation, because guess what? If you're posting that on social media, that's an open invitation for a criminal to say, hey, I got 10 days before they return. Let's go target their house. And of course, this has happened. This is a great segue into social media. We want to talk about your personal information as much as your corporate, your business information, because as I showed you already, criminals are targeting your business information by using information that you may be posting on your personal social media platform. So they're looking for information like your children's names, your birth date, anniversaries, pet's name, boat's name, whatever is important to you. I always make the joke about, hey, if you're constantly posting about your dog Fluffy on Facebook, chances are your password probably contains the word Fluffy, right? It may contain the current year, the year you were born, the year you were married, the year your kids were born. Those would be all things I would try if I had that information. I was trying to ethically hack into somebody's account. Of course, this is how hackers are using this information. So I always tell people to make sure you're limiting personal information on these platforms and never ever post this information as public. I did this session I think it was in Ilderton one time, and there was a bunch of what I call orange vest guys, like guys that are out on the highways working and maybe aren't on a computer as much as some of us, but certainly have smartphones and certainly are on social media. He came up to me afterwards and said, man, I'm so glad I sat through this. I had no idea I was posting all of my Facebook posts publicly. I did not have them turned to friends only. They were being posted publicly. So everything I was putting out there was public knowledge. So he, of course, changed those settings. So it's important to make sure that you look at your settings on Facebook and some of these platforms and make sure that you're posting to friends only. Also use multi-factor authentication wherever possible. That's simply where you receive a text message or some sort of secondary credential in addition to your password to authenticate. I know it's a pain in the butt, but you really need to start doing that as much as possible. It's going to help protect you from being a victim. Make sure you're using strong passwords as well. 1234 or 4321 is really not going to cut it. And neither is the word password going to cut it. Those are all things that hackers will immediately try. I mentioned using a password manager. Dashlane is one that I like. Password manager is where you have a password to Dashlane, but that's the only password you have to remember. Dashlane stores the rest of your passwords in a secure encrypted file, and it populates those passwords on all of your websites. You can even have a case where Dashlane picks the password for you, so you don't even know what your password is on that website. Dashlane manages all of that for you, and you just need to remember your password to Dashlane. And typically, it can use facial recognition or biometrics as well. So that's one example. It also has a VPN, by the way, so you could load as part of Dashlane service. They do have a VPN that you could load on your computer or smartphone. So it's a nice solution, one that I recommend you looking at. You know, I always tell this to people, and it's a bit tongue in cheek, but it really is it really is something to take to heart. And I just say, don't ever post anything on a social media platform that you would not be willing to post on a billboard outside your house, your parents' house, your children's house, your place of worship, your place of employment. If you're not prepared to put this out publicly on a billboard, don't post it on social media, because it will come back to haunt you. Social media accounts aren't yours. You're just agreeing to the terms set by the social media companies. And I would argue that probably most of you haven't even read the terms. Do you even know what you're agreeing to, right? These are all things that people are so anxious to get on these platforms that they may miss some of the fine print. I tell my kids this all the time, and certainly young people. Anything can and will be used against you. Anything that is on social media is out there. As an employer of young people, I mean, it would be common for me to go out and look at a LinkedIn profile or a Facebook profile to see what kind of character I'm actually hiring. You know, and you know, my kids would argue, oh, you know, we're on Snapchat, Dad, and we take a picture of somebody and it's gone in a few minutes. It's, you know, so it erases itself. And I said, oh, really? So what happens to that person that takes a screen capture of that image on their iPhone, and then it goes out into the iCloud, and now that image is out there forever. So Snapchat may have removed it, but somebody took a manual screen capture of that, so that image is out there forever. Like, nothing goes away on the World Wide Web. And I mentioned this already, enabling multi-factor authentication wherever possible. So we're getting into the latter half, where we're going to kind of shift the focus a little bit on more about protecting your business and sort of some of the building blocks that you need to have in place as a business owner. You know, up to this point, it's really been more about how to protect yourself and your personal and corporate information. But this is now going to talk more generically as a business owner. So first of all, I always tell people, make sure you have a plan, right? Make sure you have a company or an individual, whether that person works for you or not, that can assist you if you think you've been breached. This is not something where you want to be scrambling to try to find somebody if you think something's happened, right? Because you're going to be vulnerable. An unscrupulous person might charge you more because they know you're in a pickle. So it's important to have somebody lined up before that breach occurs. It's also critical to act quickly to avoid any future issues, especially with ransomware. You know, some of you may be a size where you might have a server running in your office. Some of you may not be. Some of you may be just an individual, you know, running a consulting company or a services company. It's just you. It's just you. You are the company, and you just have a laptop. But again, if you have a server or a network in your organization, one computer getting infected can infect the rest of the environment pretty quickly. So it is very critical to act immediately. Don't wait. Contact your IT provider as soon as you suspect anything. I always talk about taking a guilty until proven innocent approach. So flipping it around and saying, if I think something is bogus, it probably is. It's not the other way around. It's probably like, well, you know, I think this looks weird, but I'm going to just click on it anyway because it probably isn't. No, it probably is. If you're suspicious of it, it probably is malicious, and you probably shouldn't click on it, and you should probably get someone else to have a look at it to ensure that you're not clicking on something you shouldn't be. Again, time is of the essence. We've talked about that a couple of times here. So an easy way, if you think, especially on a network, an easy way would be to act quickly is to unplug your network cable from the wall, right? Or if you're on wireless, disable your wireless access so that, you know, hopefully that infection would stay on your computer and not spread to the rest of the computers in your organization. What does a network cable look like? Again, being a bit facetious here, most of us know what a network cable looks like, but some people don't. It looks like a phone cable, a little bit wider, could be blue, could be yellow, could be red, could be white, but that's what a network cable looks like. And you can simply unplug that from the rest of your network, to make sure that you don't have issues, right? It's a simple way. I mean, I've had situations where people were on the phone with somebody, they think they've been infected, we're telling them to turn their computer off, only to find out later that they turned their monitor off. They didn't turn their computer off, they turned the monitor off, and that doesn't do anything. So I always tell people, just pull that network cable out of the wall. That way, whatever's on your computer, it's not going to spread throughout the network. A couple other things to think about if you're an employer, you have a business, educate your staff. Make cyber education part of your training, part of your onboarding plan. If you're bringing people into the organization and you have an onboarding procedure, make sure this is part of the plan, right? Much like what we're doing today, we offer this training more suited to end users. You saw a large part of that training in the first part of this presentation. We get into a little bit more detail in terms of some of the scams and how to prevent them. But yeah, make cybersecurity training part of your training policy. And like I said, consider more formal classroom style education. We actually have a product that we use as part of this, that we actually send out bogus emails to companies from time to time, trying to catch their staff. So we'll create an email that looks like it's coming from the CRA or Canada Post or eBay, whatever, and we're trying to catch that person to click on that. And then if they do, they get a kind of a virtual slap on the wrist. They got to do a little bit more education, but it sort of keeps it front and center to remind people that this is going on. And then over time, you would hope that your employees would get better at this. So, I mean, the building blocks in terms of protecting yourself, I've mentioned firewall a couple times in the presentation. So a firewall is just simply a device that sits right behind whatever your internet provider has given you. Maybe you have a cable modem, or maybe you're lucky enough to have fiber in your facility. Maybe you're not lucky and you have DSL or a satellite connection, but a firewall is what protects your internal network from the outside. And this is part of having a comprehensive security plan and ransomware response plan. So prevention starts with having a proper firewall and having proper endpoint protection running on your computer. Endpoint protection is equally as important as having a firewall, because if you're outside of your firewall, the endpoint software running on your computer acts as a firewall, right? It's important to be able to detect the presence of ransomware on a device, and that's what that endpoint product will do in conjunction with the firewall, right? It's important to have a plan to communicate with suppliers, internal people, employees, your IT provider, as an example, if you think something has happened. Probably, well, it's certainly one of the most important points on this slide is recovery. And we're going to talk about this in a second. To have a proper business continuity plan. And we're going to go into what that means. What is a business continuity plan? Because here's the thing, right? It's not if, it's when in a lot of cases, right? So what we're saying here is, what if all else fails? What if I'm doing the right things? What if I'm educating my staff? What if I've got proper endpoint protection? I've got a firewall, yet somebody walked in here with a USB stick, they plugged it in their computer, and we got infected. It sat dormant for months and months and months, and then boom, it activated, and now we're infected. What do we do? I mean, this is a scary screen to see. If you see this screen, your files have been encrypted. Do not pass go, right? This is a bad screen to see. A reboot is not going to help. And by the way, I never recommend people pay a ransom when they get ransomware, because we're dealing with criminals here, and we don't know that they're going to actually honor that. I have heard situations where people have paid the ransom and not got their files back. So what do we do in this case? Well, this is where the business continuity comes in. So of course, nothing is 100% guaranteed, as I just said. You can do all the training, have all the preventative measures in the world, and you still get hit with ransomware. It's not if, but when. And what we find is over 90% of these breaches are a result of somebody making a mistake. It's a people thing. It's a people issue. I think it's the published number is like 93% of all security breaches involve human error, not technology error, not something wasn't set up correctly. It's human error. Somebody does something wrong and a breach occurs. So again, I always say it's not if, but when, right? So what is business continuity? So business continuity is about having nightly backups at a minimum, right? Are you getting nightly backups, right? Are you Are you taking backups only at night, or do you need to do that more frequently? Most of our customers take a backup every hour. Okay, we're taking a backup on the hour. We're not just relying on a backup at night, because if I get hit with ransomware at 4 in the afternoon and I have to fail back to my previous night's backup, I've lost an entire day's worth of work if that's what I'm doing. So, consider taking more frequent backups. This is another critical piece. Is your backup going off site, ideally to the cloud? I can't tell you how many times we've come into a situation where we're maybe taking on a new customer that's not happy with their existing provider, and we find out that yes, they're getting local backups, but those backups are not going off site. Sometimes people are taking USB drives off site and swapping them out every night. I mean, I guess that's a worst case scenario, but that's not recommended, right? What's recommended is to have a solution that actually pushes it out to the cloud. Okay. Um, and then, can you run your computer system in the event of a disaster, right? So guess what? You might have a backup. You might have your backup sitting on a little hard drive, but if your server crashes or your laptop crashes, well, how are you going to run that? Yeah, you've got your backup there, but you have nothing to run it on. So these are all things to consider when building a business continuity plan. What is it really? A business continuity plan is really a written plan that ensures your business will stay up. It'll stay up and running even after a disaster, meaning that there's no visible issue to your customers and suppliers. There's no hit to your reputation. This is essentially what a business continuity plan is. It's just a plan to make sure that if some disaster happens, and disaster can mean anything from a server just failing, an old server failing, to maybe a water main breaking or a sprinkler going off in your computer room. Could be a significant disaster. Maybe you get hit with a tornado or a lightning strike, or heaven forbid, a fire. I mean, I rarely see what I call the smoking hole. And really, I've seen very, very few true disasters in my career, with the exception of course, I was part of Hurricane Katrina when I lived in Oklahoma. So we had customers that were in Louisiana that absolutely lost data, and not necessarily customers that we were supporting, but customers that came to us after and saying, hey, we're in trouble, can you help? And of course, a lot of people went out of business, so they didn't have a proper business continuity plan. I would encourage you to test your backups monthly. So if you've got a nightly backup running, or a backup that runs every hour, make sure you're testing those backups. It's one thing to have backups running. It's another thing to actually test them and make sure that they're working. Okay, so how can we help? How can Attaché Group help? This is the 2 slides, a little bit about my company, so that you know that there is some help out there if you need help. So one of the things we do is we have an offering called, managed security. And because really security is the most difficult part of managing IT, so we recommend people outsourcing this complexity to somebody that knows, right? So what we do is we provide you a managed firewall and your endpoint protection and monitoring for 1 monthly charge. Okay. And so that includes basic network monitoring. We're looking for security threats. We're looking for kind of any network performance issues, any rogue devices on your network, and so forth. Know that this managed firewall can go all the way down to like a single user or a couple of users in an office. This is not, a big ticket item. We would look at doing this for smaller businesses as well. So it's what we call our managed security offering. We also have managed business continuity. So more about what I was just talking about, having a good plan for if you get hit with ransomware to be able to roll back and recover from that very rapidly. How this looks is we install an appliance on premise that backs up your critical information. So this would typically back up a server or multiple servers, and we're continuously monitoring that. And we also conduct an annual disaster recovery test in the cloud, because this solution, not only does it push it to the cloud, but I can also run your entire environment in the cloud if something happened to your location, if you were compromised, if you had a flood or a fire, or even if you had an extended power outage. Let's say you had in the wintertime, you had a power outage that lasted for a couple of weeks, and you need to spin up your environment. We can spin it up and run it in the cloud. Even if you don't have a server and you're just a single individual running a laptop, we have a service where for about $25 a month, we can take that laptop and back it up to the cloud on a daily basis, so that you have a complete image of your laptop in the cloud. So if something happens to that laptop, if it gets damaged, stolen, lost, you can buy a new laptop and we can pull that image back down, and you basically picked up exactly where you left off for as little as $25 a month. So of course we offer what we call our fully managed IT support, because our argument is like most small businesses don't need a full-time person. I mean, if you're less than 20, 15 or 20 employees and you have a full-time IT person, I would hope that that IT person is doing other things besides just supporting your environment, because that's probably not justified to have a full-time person. And you're probably not in the business of recruiting IT talent either. If your business is not recruiting IT talent, how do you know what to look for, and how do you keep up to speed on that, right? And I would also say relying on one individual for your IT knowledge is pretty risky, right? You might have the best person in the world, but what happens if that person wins the lottery, or they just decide they want to go do something completely different? Maybe they're close to retirement age. Having all of that IT knowledge in one individual is extremely risky. I think our approach, which is more of a teamed approach, is a better one, where you've got a monthly price, and we're helping you with those types of issues. So some final thoughts, and we'll close out, and we got some time for some Q&A. Again, I mentioned at the very beginning, it's not just your business data that's at risk, it's your personal information is at risk as well. Back to the example of the lady and the kids of her the photos of her grandkids, right? Your personal information is worth something because it's worth something to you, right? Um, Remember, strong passwords, enabling screen locks on your computer, making sure you're doing all your security updates on your Windows machines. By the way, if you're running anything less than Windows 10, if you're running Windows 7, or heaven forbid Windows XP, you got to get off those platforms. They are no longer supported by Microsoft, and they are vulnerabilities. You should be running Windows 10 if you're running Windows, or some current Mac operating system. Remember to do your security updates, and use multi-factor authentication wherever possible. Don't use personal information in your passwords, like your mother's maiden name, your pet's name, your children's birthdays, et cetera, et cetera. Just stay away from that completely. Where the industry is going is more of a complex phrase, where you'll come up with a phrase that maybe is 20 characters long that you have to type in, and it's a quirky phrase that only you know. And it's virtually impossible for anybody to break that, because it's not just a word, it's a phrase. And if you do that, there's some strong arguments to be made that you can keep your password, or that this phrase can stay out there for 12 months at a time. You don't have to change it every 90 days, or every 6 months. You can actually keep it longer because it's much more complex. It's also easy for you to remember it because it's a phrase. I always come up with a phrase and maybe put an exclamation mark at the end, and I start it with a cap, right? And that long phrase is so complex that it's virtually impossible to figure out. Make sure that all of your important data is being backed up and sent off site. We just talked about that a few minutes ago. Information on your computer could be lost at any time. It's vitally important that you're backing it up and you're getting it off site. Don't just back it up to a USB attached device and then leave that device plugged into your computer, because guess what? If your computer gets ransomware, it will encrypt your USB device as well. So your backup of your computer becomes encrypted as well if it's connected to your computer. You'd be wise to even unplug that device if that's all you have once the backup is finished. Always just use common sense. I always use this example that, I can't tell you how many times people will call me and say, yeah, I clicked on a tracking link and I got something. And I'm kind of like, well, were you expecting a package from UPS? No. Well, then why would you click on a UPS tracking link, right? Unless your job is a receiver and a shipper, and you're receiving packages in and out all the time. If you're not expecting a package from UPS, don't click on a UPS tracking link. At least hover over the link and make sure it says ups.com. I mentioned a few slides ago, make sure you have a business continuity plan. Even if it's a single page that just lists out, here's the things we need to do if we have some sort of disaster or breach. And I would just really encourage you to make sure you're testing any backups very, very frequently, like at least every 30 days, to make sure that you can restore your backups, right? It's one thing for a backup to say it's completed. It's a whole other thing to actually do a restore of that and test that it's going to work. And lastly, if you take one thing away from this presentation, back all the way to the beginning where I talked about the lady at the city of Burlington who transferred $500,000 to a bogus account, don't conduct any significant business transaction based on an email alone. Always, always reach out and confirm that email is legitimate. Reach out and talk to somebody, walk down the hall and talk to that person face to face and make sure that it's legitimate. Don't conduct any transaction on an email alone. And that's all I have for the presentation. We do have some time for Q&A. I know I was encouraging people to to submit their questions in the chat throughout. Would also appreciate any feedback on the session. Again, email address, best way to reach me is just tcox, as in Todd Cox, tcox @attachegroup.com. We are recording, so we will make a recording of this presentation available. But don't seem to see any questions in the chat window. So Todd, if you wanted to take it off mute and close out the presentation, I'll turn it back over to you.
Hi, Todd. It's Sherry here at
Hey, Sherry.
Health Center. No worries. Todd just had to leave the room. Just wanted to say thank you for taking the time today. I hope that everybody, if they didn't have the knowledge, that they've gained some knowledge today to bring them forward with both their personal and their business technology lives. And again, thank you so much and feel free to reach out to Todd if you have any questions or concerns. That he is quite approachable and he'll be able to answer your questions.
Okay, so got some comment. Thanks so much. I'm going back into my bubble. Yeah, we're all kind of in that COVID bubble lately, and hopefully we continue to do the right things to get out of this, and we get back to some sort of new normal down the road. I think this is right now for me. These webinars are much more of my normal going forward. So I do really appreciate everybody's time. At this point, we're going to stop recording and sign off. Again, I would encourage anyone to reach out if you have any comments or feedback. Just a question here. Are there reliable VPN providers in Canada? I mean, I don't know of any Canadian-based specifically, but in all of these solutions, whether it be the Dashlane, NordVPN, there's another one called Hide My Ass. It's a picture of a donkey. You can select a Canadian server. So you can tell the VPN that you want to authenticate to a server that's based in Canada. So when you do that, you actually have a secure connection, and you're in Canada. So your IP, your address on the internet will still look like you are Canadian. And likewise, a lot of these solutions are used. So if you connect to a US server, you can actually look like you're in the US, and sometimes it'll work to be able to get you US subscription services. So maybe there's some sort of a network you want to stream that's only available to people in the US. Sometimes these VPN solutions will help with that because it looks like you're in the United States. So I'm not familiar with any that are based in Canada per se, but all of them have servers anywhere in the world that you can connect to. You just basically tell it what server you want to connect to. So hopefully that answers that question. Again, any questions that come up afterwards, please email me. Feel free to email me, and I'll do my best to get an answer to you. Okay. So at that point, thanks very much, and we'll sign off.